Good evening and welcome to Scottish Cycling's question and answer session on COVID-19 restrictions and more specifically the permitted activity for cycling following the latest Scottish Government announcement. I hope everybody is safe and well, and I hope you've got a cup of tea with you ready for our session. I am Sophie McCall. I'm Head of Development and Participation. Fraser, can you just move us on to the next slide, please? With me tonight, I have Fraser Johnston, one of our club development managers. We also have Morven Brown, National Events Officer, Jill Thane, one of our club development coordinators, and Madeline Watson, another one of our club development coordinators. We are incredibly pleased that you've been able to join us this evening, particularly pleased that by very virtue of the fact that we are running this Q&A means that cycling activity is able to start its return. I'm sure that you are all as excited as we are to be able to start our return to activity. And whilst we do still have some way to go until our sport is back to normal, this is a really positive step and one which we're all really grateful that we can take. We will be doing a little bit getting into the detail of guidance and what is permissible at the moment. We've then got a few questions and answers which we've already received, which we will cover. We are able to take questions, additional questions at the end. So if you have questions throughout tonight's webinar, please use the Q&A function. Please use that function, not the chat function, just because it's a little bit easier for it to be flagged by us so that we can make sure that we have answered the question. So please use the Q&A function. Next slide, please, Fraser. Thank you. So before we do get into the detail of the guidance, I did just want to set the scene a little bit by outlining the process by which the guidelines are set and the principles which we're operating by. The wellbeing, health and safety of our members, staff, volunteers and the general public is the first priority for Scottish Cycling. This is always at the forefront of our decision making as we navigate through this uncharted territory, and we thank each and every one of our clubs, members, volunteers and staff for their continued patience and support. In terms of the process that we follow, while producing the Scottish Cycling guidance, we've outlined the timetable from last week to give you a little bit of insight as to what goes on and the tight turnaround times that we can sometimes face. What is really important to note is that we don't get advance notice of the content of any Scottish Government announcements before the First Minister gets up to speak. We hear it at exactly the same time that you do, and I'm sure we've all learned in the last year. The future is really hard to predict at the moment. Once the First Minister has made an announcement, Sport Scotland and Active Scotland begin their work on producing a guidance document for all sports. The detail that's included within this is significant and goes far beyond the headlines which are covered in announcement speeches. So it can take a little bit of time for us to get that finished version. Once Scottish Cycling does receive that guidance document from Sport Scotland, we then enter into sport-specific conversations with Sport Scotland, clarifying any questions which specifically relate to cycling. It is important to note here that there are a number of areas in the guidance which are mandated by Scottish Government and which Scottish Cycling does not have the power to change. For example, the requirement for physical distancing and travel restrictions, as well as the maximum number, are things that Scottish Cycling can't change, and our guidance therefore includes these mandated restrictions. The team at Scottish Cycling then worked really hard to produce guidance that's simple, easy to understand, but first and foremost is safe. This is then signed off by Sport Scotland before we circulate it to COVID-19 coordinators. If at any point you've any questions or feedback on the guidance, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us by emailing clubdevelopment@scottishcycling.org.uk. That email address will be on the slides. It's on the slide just there and will be on the slides again at the end of the webinar tonight. We will always do our best to answer any of your questions and clarify any areas where we can. Finally, before I hand over to Fraser, I want to recognise the privileged position which sport, and specifically cycling, is currently in. We need to remain conscious that the pandemic is ongoing and that whilst we're really positive about moving out of restrictions, mainland Scotland is still in level 4 stay at home. The exemption for organised sport has returned due to the recognition of the positive effect which physical activity and social interaction for group sport has on physical and mental well-being, something which I think everybody here tonight will absolutely recognise. So we want to remain grateful that we're able to take this small but significant step whilst remaining patient yet optimistic about the future steps in the return to our sport. We will be back, we'll just take a little bit of time to get there fully. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Fraser to talk you through the specific restrictions at the moment.
Thanks, Sophie. So I guess just to start off with was just to kind of give just an overview of the latest update, which I'm sure you've all now seen. So the latest update was issued on 12th of March, and this was mainly an update to the level 4 stay-at-home guidance, which applies to mainland Scotland and a few of the islands. There was a minor update made to level 3 guidance just to bring some of the group sizes into line with what was in level 4, and that document's also been updated on the website. Probably the first thing I wanted to just bring people's attention to was just to separate the two different categories of activity that the Scottish Government currently views. Broadly, they view it in two groups: informal activity and organised or formal activity. Our guidance is mainly concerning what falls under organised activity, but we do include within our guidance documents some headline information around what's permissible under informal activity. Informal cycling is defined as cycling where there is not a COVID-19 coordinator, and it must comply with the restrictions which apply with wider society. These restrictions at the moment are generally categorised under the title of outdoor socialising rules, and they vary between different age groups, like many of ours do as well. So most people are now know that from Friday, 4 adults from 2 households can mix, 12 to 17-year-olds, 4 individuals from 4 households, and the under 12s don't count towards the total number. For organised informal activity, this is defined by the involvement of a COVID-19 coordinator for the planning or the delivery of activity. Larger group sizes are permitted in this instance because of the mitigating actions that a COVID coordinator will oversee within a club. Now, the main disparity that people also notice between informal and formal activity relates to travel. And what this has really come about of is because of some legislation that was laid in the Parliament back in November when we were in the level system. I'm not going to read the full title of that legislation because it's a bit of a tongue twister, but essentially what this legislation did was create a distinction between what was permissible for informal activity and what was permissible for organised and formal activity. So for informal activity, where you are going out with a household member or someone from another household, you can travel out with your local authority during a ride. You're also permitted to travel up to 5 miles out with the level 4 area, which is pretty much any local authority in mainland Scotland at the moment, to start your ride. And you can also transit through multiple level 4 areas on a ride. Where the difference is that for over 18s, they cannot travel out with a local authority area to take part in an organised activity such as group rides or coaching sessions for organised activity. And we recognise that this disproportionately impacts on cycling because of the nature of how our sport operates. But for other sports, what this means is that if you live in Falkirk but your golf club is in Stirling, you can't travel to that golf club in Stirling. You can only partake in your sport within the local authority you decide. One change that came around last week was that previously under 18s fell under the same kind of mass rule or legislation as the over 18s. Under 18s can now travel into level 4 areas to participate in club activity. if that's where it normally takes place. Now, we continue to have active conversations with the Active Scotland Division of the Scottish Government to make the case for this, and we do that in partnership with other governing bodies that have similar operating structures to ourselves. But at present, that's the state of play for travel and the differences between informal and organised activity. Physical distancing is obviously one of the key ones as well, which has a massive impact on the practicalities of running activity. In common with all other under 12 guidance across society, there's no physical distancing before, during, or after the activity for under 12s. So under 12s are fine to mix before activity, mix during, mix after. And this is kind of replicated in what we see in the school environment as well, where under 12s have returned to primary schools without physical distancing in the classroom, and life feels pretty much normal for them. Where the difference has started to appear now is what happens from age 12 plus. Physical distancing must be observed at all times, before, during, and after activity. And this is similar to what you see in other parts of society. Age 12 plus is pretty much secondary school onwards, and obviously at the moment, schools are massively reduced in capacity because of having to physical distance in the school environment and out with the school environment, both in PE and other outdoor activities. And likewise, in terms of mixed age groups, the entire group must adhere to the guidance for the older participant. So what that means is, if you're in a youth club and you're running sessions where there's an under 12 group, but there's a couple of 12 plus in it, then the guidance in place for physical distancing and group size then applies to the oldest participants in the group. In relation to coaches, mountain bike and ride leaders involved in supporting organised activity, they should attempt to keep physical distance as much as possible, but it is recognised that this won't always be possible to ensure the safety of participants. In such circumstances, COVID coordinators should consider appropriate action that could be taken as part of the risk assessment for the club. And there's some further information about that on the COVID-19 resource hub on the website, where there's information for the COVID coordinator and also information around risk management. So in relation to under 12s, clubbing coaching activity for under 12s can only take place in groups of up to 30 from unlimited households. So one of the questions we've had around that is, if a club operates in a large open space, could they have multiple groups taking place within that venue? And the answer is yes, but the key is that all of those groups are seen as separate bubbles. So there shouldn't be any point during the session where those bubbles mix or cross over, and they should essentially have a separate pick-up and drop-off areas, etc. To support the delivery of activity within those groups, a maximum of 4 adults from 2 households are permitted. Now, unless clubs have got coaches from the same household, this is probably going to mean 2 coaches or mountain bike leaders within the group. And those people that are supporting the delivery of that activity are included within the group size. Under 18s, as I said in the previous slide, may travel into or out of a level 4 area for organised sport, as that is where their club activity usually takes place. And travel across all levels is permitted for qualified leaders or coaches, either paid or voluntary, to support the delivery of activity. For age 12 to 17, this is where we start to have some different distinctions and some different guidance in place. For club activity, which falls under the area of coaching in a traffic-free environment, for age 12 to 17, this can take place in groups of up to 15 from unlimited households. The same rules apply regarding adults and the number of households they can come from to support the delivery of the activity. And again, the coach and mountain bike leader assistant is included within the group size. For 12 to 17-year-olds, the same travel rules apply, so they continue to be able to travel in and out of different areas to take part in their sport. When it comes on to group rides in club activity for 12 to 17-year-olds, as you'll see in the guidance, the Scottish Government guidance allows for groups of up to 15. However, at this present time, because of physical distancing and some other areas that we'll come on to later, Scottish Cycling strongly recommends a maximum group ride size of 9 from unlimited households. For leadership qualifications, so lead rides, mountain bike, MBL, lead rides for under 18, as above in terms of group sizes. And the standard tutor and learner ratio applies, which is 1 to 8 for the leadership awards. And lastly, for age 18 plus, very similar here to the 12 to 17s, club activity in a traffic-free environment, so coaching sessions can take place up to 15 from unlimited households. For leadership sessions, following the standard tutor and learner ratio of 1 to 8, which gives a group size of 9. We'll touch on that some more. Adults, which is the difference from the under 18s, are not allowed to travel out with the local authority area to take part in organised activity, such as club group rides, coaching sessions, or events. And additionally, as I covered on the travel slide, transiting through multiple level 4 areas on organised group ride is currently not permitted. So just to touch on a couple of other areas with regards to activity that kind of falls under Scottish cycling. Events are currently not permitted to take place. British cycling education delivery is currently suspended, and indoor activity is currently not permitted. So I guess just to touch on the Covid-19 coordinator role, and I'm sure most of you have probably been in this role now for a number of months, but I guess just to reiterate the kind of key components of the role. Essentially, it's to lead on the implementation of mitigating measures to reduce risk. A lot of these will be outlined within the guidance documents, and there's also a range of appendice documents that we've included in the Covid-19 Resource Hub, which gives some further ideas and considerations to support people with the return to activity. The role also, I guess, involves keeping up to date with the latest guidance and how it impacts on the club. Being the main point of contact between Scottish cycling regarding the return to activity as we emerge from Covid-19. Having oversight of registers for all club activity, and linked to that, being the point of contact for NHS Scotland Test and Protect if someone identified participation in a club activity during an interview. Now, I don't know many examples within cycling, but I do know from speaking to people that work in other sports that this is happening. Covid-19 coordinators are being contacted by Test and Protect in other sports, and they are being asked for details of who participants have come into contact with. So we know that the Test and Protect protocols that we've outlined in the guidance documents on the website are actually being used in practice. I guess in relation to support for Covid-19 coordinators, I'd encourage anyone to always reach out to us by emailing clubdevelopment@scottishcycling.org.uk. Also, the Sport Scotland Covid-19 officer training is a free course which is available on the website, and I encourage people to revisit that if it's been a while since you first took it. It only takes 30 minutes to help to refresh your knowledge. There's also a number of other different modules that Sport Scotland has developed in partnership with the SFA, which may also be useful, particularly for clubs that maybe didn't return last time at all and are kind of considering returning for the first time this time. So the two modules, there's a Covid-19 awareness module for players, participants and parents and carers, and there's also mental health and wellbeing awareness training for coaches and volunteers. I've been on both of these myself, and very similar to the Covid-19 officer training, really interactive software, and particularly for potentially participants and parents and carers, just gives people a little bit more peace of mind of what they're going to be experiencing when they return to sessions. There's also the Covid-19 risk assessment tool. You can find this on the Covid-19 hub on the website. We developed this with British Cycling back after the first lockdown, and it's a useful tool to use to contextualise some of the different considerations you might have to make regarding the return to activity. And as I mentioned previously on the Covid-19 hub, there's a range of appendix documents covering the 5 areas noted below, which do provide some further information and guidance on how to approach the return of activity in those areas. I guess just to touch again on Test and Protect, and I'm sure some people on the call might have had experience of this themselves. I guess the main messaging on Test and Protect hasn't changed since it was first introduced. So I think I've touched on most of this already, but the real key element of Test and Protect and how it can function well within the clubs is ensuring that an accurate register is taken of all participants that have engaged in club activity. There's a range of different tools that you can use for this. There's been some good discussion on the Club Development Facebook group over the last few days that other clubs have shared how they've been approaching it. So I'd encourage people to have a look on there for some ideas of where to look. Scottish Cycling is developing a club management system at the moment, but we're probably hoping that the pandemic might have eased a little bit in terms of the restrictions by the time we're able to get clubs into it. But that should hopefully be available to clubs at some point in the future that will allow for sign up and registration for sessions as well. But in the interim, I'd encourage people to check out whatever clubs have suggested that has worked for them already in terms of signing on and registering for sessions. I guess the important thing to understand, particularly around Test and Protect, is that it's not the COVID-19 coordinator's role to inform members if someone at the club tests positive for COVID-19. Our experience speaking to other sports is that the Test and Protect team has been fairly swift in carrying that out, and they'll follow up with close contacts if they determine people to be close contacts of positive cases. So I'm now going to move on to the Q&A session now. We've got some pre-submitted questions, which we'll run through first, but please also submit questions via the Q&A function. I can see that flashing up in front of me, so I can definitely see there's been some questions coming in. Sophie and I are just going to take these one at a time. I think I'm going to take the first one, and then I'm going to pass on to Sophie. So the first question we had in was around why does the Scottish Government guidance say you can travel 5 miles from local authority boundary to participate in exercise, but why does the Scottish Cycling guidance say you can't cross the boundary? And I guess I touched on this already in relation to the travel slide, and it's very much down to what the government legislation on travel permits. Essentially, informal exercise has been given that exemption to leave local authorities within the legislation, and organised sporting activity hasn't. We continue to have conversations with other sports and the Scottish Government on that, and we did include a statement on the update on Friday just to state that out, that we continue to seek clarity. When that will change, we don't know. There is an update to Parliament tomorrow on the next easing of lockdown restrictions, and hopefully some insight into what the different level system will include from hopefully the end of April when that comes into force. So hopefully we might get some sort of indication then of when this might change.
Thanks, Fraser. So on to the next question that we've had a few queries about. So it is there a limit to the distance or time that I can be on the bike? The answer to that is no. There is no official time or distance limits within the guidance. Obviously, if it is organised activity, you are limited to what you can do within your own local authority, and you're not able to leave your local authority area. For informal activity, you can start and finish from your home, or travel up to 5 miles outside of your local authority area to start your ride. And exactly as Fraser has just mentioned, we do recognise the different position between organised and informal sport here, and we're working hard with our partners in Sport Scotland to be able to address this. But again, I would just reiterate that these travel restrictions are written into law. So until such time as there is a legislative change made, we do have to observe these. The main message, however, when it comes to limit in terms of time or distance, is that we are in a stay at home message. So where possible, cyclists are asked to stay local, and you should be self-sufficient.
Thanks, Sophie. The next question was, I guess, just to understand about the connection that Scottish Cycling has with Sport Scotland, and why we can't just create our own cycle-specific guidance. I probably alluded to this a little bit earlier on, and Sophie did too, in her explanation of the process that we go through. But essentially, the approach that the Scottish Government has taken across all sectors is devolving through their divisions a responsibility for interpreting the changes and restrictions to Sport Scotland, who in turn create a framework for all SUVs to follow. So all sport governing bodies are following this process, and all guidance which we produce follow the framework. The most up-to-date version can be found on the Sport Scotland website. Jill or Maddie might have thrown the link in to the chat there. And essentially, any guidance that we produce has to be signed off by Sport Scotland before it can be published. So they, through that signing off process, they're making sure that what we are saying is permissible within cycling is consistent with what they've agreed with Active Scotland and the Scottish Government.
Okay, next question over to me, which is, why did we feel it was necessary to reduce the group size from 15 to 9? So as we have covered, the maximum number is given by the Scottish Government, and that is 15 for anyone aged over 12. The reason that we felt it was important to suggest reducing that number is because of the requirement that physical distancing must be maintained. So again, this applies across all sports and physical activity in Scotland. This is not exclusive to cycling, and it is also mandated by the Scottish Government and is therefore something that we're not able to change. Just to clarify, when we talk about physical distancing, again, in this context, it is physical distancing of 2 metres. We therefore deemed it wouldn't be safe for group rides to take place in groups of 15. So we are encouraging, we're using the wording of strongly recommend a maximum group ride of 9 for unlimited households. What is most important here is to emphasise that this has to be risk assessed, and all organised sport must be risk assessed using a COVID-19 risk assessment. If your risk assessment deems that it is safe to have a larger group, that is permissible up to a maximum of 15. Equally, your risk assessment might deem that a lower number is appropriate. The group size should be covered in your risk assessment and all risks appropriately mitigated against. So again, 9 is a maximum that we are recommending. It doesn't mean that you have to go up to 9. Why did we choose 9? Well, what we felt was our leader awards have a ratio of 1 to 8. That's for MBL, that's for ride leader. Therefore, we did feel that that would be a number that is familiar with a large percentage of our community, and it would be a number that they would recognise. As I say, the key here is to risk assess that number. If it isn't safe to do so, then please do not undertake that activity. We have had a few questions about positioning on the road and whether we will produce specific guidance on how you should position on the road. This isn't something that we're able to do, quite simply because it is entirely dependent on your environment, what roads you want and where you are. So it comes back to your risk assessment and the need for you to risk assess your route fully and to be guided by the number that is appropriate within your risk assessment. And again, I would emphasise that we are strongly recommending a maximum of 9. However, it may be that it is appropriate for your group to be much smaller, or for you to split that into a number of smaller groups.
Okay, next one I was just going to pick up on, we've had a few inquiries about, is does the COVID-19 coordinator need to be present for all activity? And I probably covered this a little bit around some of the test and protect stuff. The key is that the COVID-19 coordinator needs to have an awareness of all organised club activity. So they don't need to be present, but they do need to have discussions with all deliverers about the mitigating action required to be taken to ensure COVID-19 guidance is complied with. They should have access to the registers for the session, so they know who was there, and their contact details should be widely known and easily accessible to club members so that they can be passed on to test and protect. What I've seen some people do is create email addresses, club name, COVID coordinator at gmail.com, for example, so that there's a clear email address that people can use. But no, the COVID-19 coordinator doesn't need to be present, but for example, particularly in youth clubs, some visibility, perhaps when returning to answer questions that participants or parents might have, could be really helpful as people return to sessions.
Back to me for again another very common question, which we know a lot of clubs are experiencing at the moment, which relates to first aid qualifications. And what you should do if your first aid qualification has expired and you can't access a course at present. In terms of updates for further extensions beyond March, we're working very closely with British Cycling on this, and an update will be going out to all volunteers who have a first aid qualification in the next few days. So that will be going out to any British Cycling volunteers that have a British Cycling qualification, such as a British Cycling coach or a ride leader. What that's going to say is that there isn't an extension beyond the end of March from HSE, but British Cycling have worked really hard to develop an online first aid essentials course that will be made available to all British Cycling volunteers. What that will do is act as an online refresher as a replacement for an emergency first aid at work course. Therefore, if the qualification that you are operating under requires that, then you will be able to use the British Cycling first aid refresher. If your qualification, so for example, an MBL level 2 requires a 2-day first aid qualification, you won't be able to use the British Cycling refresher. There are a number of first aid providers that are running courses, so what I would highly recommend that you do is have a wee Google, have a look at your local authority websites, as there are a number that are running with physical distancing and COVID measures in place, but it is possible to book on to first aid courses in certain areas. So I would strongly encourage you to have a look out for that.
Okay, I think that brings us to the end of the questions that were coming in in advance. So I'm now just going to look through some of the questions that have come in on the chat. So an anonymous attendee has asked, is the COVID-19 risk assessment replacing the ride risk assessment? The COVID-19 risk assessment, I guess, is the content of that is very different to the standard ride risk assessment. So it does ask people to make additional considerations in regards to returning to activity. So we can put the link to that. It's on the COVID-19 Resource Hub, and I encourage people to check that out. Louise McParlin's asked, can under 18s travel to another level 4 area? What about parents? Yeah, Louise, we clarified this with Sport Scotland last week, so that's absolutely fine for parents and guardians to transport under 18s to and from club activity. Question is, questioning about triathlon clubs and the advice they've been given around local authority guidance. My understanding from speaking to Sport Scotland today is there is a disparity between the guidance in place at the moment and what Sport Scotland has allowed. And the update coming through to triathlon members in the next few days will be that the triathlon guidance will be changing, so that the travel restrictions will be aligned with the rest of sport. From Peter Cormack, in terms of the clarity from Sport Scotland and the Scottish Government on the discrepancy in transiting through multiple level 4 areas. Being really honest, we don't know. We've made representations on a number of areas over a period of time. We feed them in alongside other sports through the Active Scotland division and in the Sport Scotland. As I said previously, we're expecting tomorrow that we'll see more insight into what the contents of the different levels will look like when the protection levels framework update is published, and that might give us some sight on what's going to be permissible at different levels. So level 4 now looks different from level 4 in November, so it's possible that, I guess, further changes will take place between the different levels when it comes into force at the end of April. So we're waiting to see the same as everyone else, and any updates, as always, will come through the usual channels.
Just to jump in there as well, I saw that there's another question just exactly commenting on that there is expected to be an update tomorrow, and that this might be a bit of a dry run for us, and that could well be the case, and we will follow the same process. We will be working to get our protection level framework updated as quickly as possible. Where there is a significant change to the guidance, we think it would be helpful to run another Q&A just like this, then that's what we will do. If that means we do another one next week, the week after, then that's not a problem. We will absolutely endeavour to provide as much guidance and support for understanding the guidance as we can.
A question regarding if there can be multiple groups of 6 with a decent gap between each group. I guess very similar to the answer I provided regarding different coaching groups at a youth club. The key that Sport Scotland has asked for and the Scottish Government have asked for is that groups don't mix. So as long as those groups are distinct and they don't interact or cross over, then it's totally fine for there to be multiple groups of 9 within sessions. Andy Ingles' question about the Facebook group. If you just search on Facebook Scottish Cycling Club Development, it should come up for you. Or Jill and Maddie can throw it in the chat as well.
We've had another question again, just seeking further clarity on the 2 metre physical distancing and the number of 9. Again, to be as clear as we possibly can be on this, physical distancing is required during activity. That is a physical distance of 2 metres. If you want to do a ride on the open road, you have to observe 2 metre physical distancing. It then comes down to your risk assessment as to how you deem this safe and if you deem this is safe. If you deem this is not safe and you don't believe that you can position yourselves safely and practically on the road, then you should not undertake that activity.
A question in from D with regards to adults travelling from the local authority and kind of unqualified assistance. The definition of coach has been quite broad, D. So it's included member leaders, it's included volunteer group assistants. Some of the messaging previously was about how essential their travel was to support the delivery of activity. So if their travel is essential in order to ensure that the activity can go ahead from the club, then that is permissible under the current guidance. So any volunteers that are required to support the activity to go ahead are allowed to travel to club sessions. Just a question on travel, Sophie, around, I don't know if you see the one that came in at 8:04.
Yeah.
I'll let you mull over that one. I'll just address another one.
Yeah, you address another one while I have a proper read of it.
Sorry. So the question about will BCSC accept the first aid course that is run online? So I've seen the preview of the guidance that's going to be coming out from British Cycling in the next few days if it's not arrived already, and they do provide some information about what type of courses are permissible in terms of online instead of in person. What I would encourage people to do, like we do with some of our safeguarding courses as well, is to just get in touch with the coaching team, present some evidence of the course that you're being on, and they'll be able to give you a better answer in terms of whether that can be used instead.
Okay, I'm going to try and answer this travel question, and if I don't quite get it right, then please do put a follow-up question in the Q&A. But the question is about the definition of travel and the difference between travelling to start an activity. My understanding is the difference between travelling to start an activity, i.e. driving by car to within 5 miles outside of your local authority boundary if it is informal activity. You are allowed to travel by car to start your ride if it is informal. There is a difference between the definition of then travelling as part of your activity. This is very much part of the activity, and that is where for organised sport you cannot leave your local authority boundaries. You must stay within your local authority boundary during the activity. For organised sport, for informal sport, you can travel or transit across different local authority areas as long as you start and finish in the same place. As we've already said, we do recognise that this is a discrepancy. We have also clarified and followed this up a number of times, especially because we recognise that there have been obviously a number of questions on this area, but also there's been different interpretations by this. So as much as our position it is an unpopular one, perhaps it is the correct position, and we have clarified that numerous times. And we will continue to follow up with Sport Scotland. We will continue to follow with Sport Scotland and Scottish Government, and as soon as we get any clarity on a change in legislation on the travel restrictions, we will update our guidance and communicate that out to Covid coordinators straight away. I hope that answers the question.
Yep, just a question from Mark about do all club rides, even social rides that take advantage of the exemptions, I think he means, for organised sport require a route risk assessment and COVID risk assessment. Essentially, Mark, I guess the key is the COVID risk assessment. And for many clubs, one COVID risk assessment will cover all different activities that they're going to be doing. So there doesn't need to be a separate COVID risk assessment for each different ride or route that's been undertaken. The key is for any type of activity that's falling under the club, if it wants to comply with the exemptions in place for organised sport, then there has to be a COVID-19 coordinator oversight. There needs to be physical distancing on the ride, but there also needs to be a register and record kept of who's been in attendance on the ride.
Just looking at one here that's asking, is Scottish Cycling and Sport Scotland doing any lobbying to government to try to address the differences between informal and formal activity, especially again when it comes to travel restrictions? The answer is yes, we are. We're working very closely with Sport Scotland on this, and as soon as we have an update, then we will update our guidance.
Just a question regarding the guidance being clearer about organised activity. You've dropped 2 metres. A quick questioning why that was. We can certainly add that in. That would provide additional clarity. At present, the position is there's very limited areas in society where there's not a 2 metre rule in place. I know there's been kind of 1 metre plus rules in the past in some places, but if that would be useful, then we can certainly add in 2 metres onto the guidance document. What I would also just encourage people to do in terms of the guidance documents is if they are sharing it within clubs, is share the link to the web page rather than individual documents, because we do refresh them on a fairly regular basis, and it may not always be completely possible about what the updates have been. What we have started doing though, if you're on the COVID-19 section of the website, is we do publish just a summary of what the changes have been to the guidance, just kind of headlines, and we will email that out to COVID coordinators as well to advise if there's anything significant that people need to be aware of.
We've got another one here just clarifying that when it comes to informal activity, where you obviously are allowed to travel up to 5 miles outside of your local authority area to start your ride, just clarification that travel doesn't need to be by car, and it can be by any other form of travel. We were just using car as an example.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions at all at the moment.
I think we've just got one on, I think I think it might have been a bit of a chain that I've lost sight of the early part of it. But the question is, how would this be viewed for rotating riders from front to back? And I'm assuming that this is again in relation to physical distancing while on the road. Again, the physical distancing has to be complied with. And again, I would just re-emphasise that it comes back to what is safe and what is in your risk assessment. So physical distancing has to be maintained throughout your ride, and I would re-emphasise again, if it's not safe to undertake the activity, please don't. We do very much hope that restrictions will continue to ease, and that we will be able to remove the requirement for physical distancing at some point in the not too distant future. However, that is not the case at the moment. So if you don't feel it's safe, I appreciate that it's frustrating, because everybody just wants to get out and they want to ride in their groups again. But if it's not safe, just a little bit of patience, please. And as soon as that requirement for physical distancing is relaxed, again, we will update our guidance and you will be able to get back on what would be a kind of normal group ride.
Just a question in there from Rachel Halifax about riders aged 12 to 17. So yes, Rachel, in that example, because travel is permitted for under 18s to travel for sport, physical activity and exercise, then yes, that is still okay to go ahead for riders.
Okay, so I think that is all of the questions answered. So I would just like to finish by saying a huge thank you for coming along tonight. As I said right at the start, we're really excited and delighted that we're able to hold this Q&A, because it does mean that we are returning to activity, and we're as eager as you are to be able to get back to our normal level of activity. So I did just want to extend that thanks to the staff that are obviously on this call, so to Fraser, Morven, Maddie and Jill, but also to the staff behind the scenes. A huge amount of work goes into this guidance, so a huge thank you to them and to Sport Scotland for their continued support as well. And again, just to re-emphasise, if there is any clarity that we can provide on the guidance, or you're just not sure, please don't hesitate to give us an email on at clubdevelopment@scottishcycling.org.uk, and we will endeavour to answer your questions and update the guidance if it's an area where we can provide a little bit more clarity as well. So thank you very much for your time this evening, and I hope you have a safe return to activity.